Today's guest is Elizabeth Franz, who is a mediator who is 10 years into her practice. She supports mission-driven humans who are building a better future. The not-so-secret sauce is that, in her words, like we are better together, and with the mediator's guidance, we can make a collaborative decision and take the collective actions to meet all of our needs. So Elizabeth, thank you very much for being on here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm like that solid 8 out of 10 where it's like, I'm like doing good with enough room for improvement. So that's kind of my sweet spot that I like to be in. So thank you for asking. But yeah, I'd love to dive into more about you, right? Like I think I think you're a second mediator I've actually had on a
Really?
show. Yeah.
Oh, so
So
cool.
that it is pretty cool. And when I had that conversation with her, it was like, oh, I didn't really know. Like I've heard of mediators before, and I know, they have like a legal type role, but like I didn't really know what mediators do. So
Yeah.
feel free to start with, just that, and then how you got into doing what you're doing. Like, kind of floor is yours to contextualize all these pieces.
Yeah, I'll have to connect with her. That's really cool. I'm the second mediator to talk to. Um, so I started mediating 10 years ago, and I started in Baltimore, where you learn the inclusive model, the whole state of Maryland. If you're a community mediator, you learn the same way to mediate. And I'm really glad I started there because I learned very deeply the benefits of agreeing on what mediation is with your co-mediator and having the same skills and the same process. And when I was volunteering for that time, what became very apparent to me and very frustrating and heartbreaking is that I couldn't find a path to make mediating a career. I couldn't find a way to mediate full time and make money and support myself the way I have to. And that was devastating. I knocked on a bunch of doors. I looked around. I kept up my skills. I kept up volunteering. But I felt overall, not only did I not have the path to achieve my dream job in front of me, but I also felt that the work was being devalued. It was being treated like something a volunteer can do. A volunteer can work at a soup kitchen or a food pantry. A volunteer can take compost to the community compost bin from their front lawn. But it was a lot of time to get to a point where I was skilled enough to really be confident that I was providing a good service to people. And when I got there, I wanted that professional compensation that should come with that. And there wasn't a path. So what I did for myself is I built that path. And that path for me looked like starting my own business. And I've seen a lot of other mediators do that as well. The thing I chose to do is to walk my walk and say, if I'm telling people that they need to collaborate, that it takes at least two to solve these big problems, then it needs to take at least two to run this business. And so when I looked around the field, I thought, well, should I hire an existing mediator? Should I pick up someone from scratch? And what I found in the field of my co-mediators who were already trained, they're very set in their ways and they have an idea of what mediation is and how it should be done. And it was very difficult to kind of find that flexibility to say, hey, I'm willing to learn your way. I'm trained in the inclusive model, the facilitative, the transformative. I'll train in your way. But they weren't as willing to train in the way that I had learned to mediate. And I also found that I was at least 20 years younger than everyone that I was collaborating with. So I found apprentices. They found me. I whittled it down to one who was the most sort of assertive about knowing mediation was what she wants to do. And now we collaborate. It's a partnership as we build Humans Mediate. And we have found a third apprentice and are growing at a pace that allows for collaboration and allows for the three of us to maintain our well-beings. So that's my short answer of what I'm doing, how I got in the field. And what's important to me is that the future of mediation is accessible to people who can't afford to work for free for 10 years. And that the future of mediation is inclusive of all sorts of mediation styles and models and processes. And so I've also designed my own process, the humans mediation process, to throw it into the ring of, hey, we're all creating these processes, and I'd like to collaborate on that in the same way that lawyers have been able to collaborate and achieve a certain status in their field. And I'd also like to consider that maybe the way we've been doing things is not the way we should keep doing them. And I want to see how far we can get. So I've presented my proposal as what I think is a better way to mediate. I am walking the walk with my model to collaborate with someone instead of just being an independent practice and only mediating solo. And I'm looking to open the door to more people in mediation because I think that it's a job that is important to do for society. And I think that the people who are doing the work need to match the people who need the service. And that is not all people who are independently wealthy and able to volunteer endlessly until they finally one day might get paid.
Beautiful. So, well, okay. So first one was like, I love so much about your story from like, there was a clear passion in the craft of what you're doing. And then I was willing to like go through the ringer to get really good at my craft, regardless of what circumstantial issues came up with it. And then I wanted to create something new out of that because I could see how good it was, and then just other people couldn't. So I
Yeah.
love that aspect on many different levels, from the perseverance to the vision, etc. And I guess my follow-up would be to just kind of fill in my gaps of like knowledge, or to see like if I
Yeah.
understand everything correctly, where it's like what it sounds like to me is what you're doing is taking something that the norm or the bias in your industry, and I mean like the legal industry in general,
Yeah.
is like this is like some sort of like offshoot or something that isn't as important as like the,
Yeah.
for better lack of better word, like the lawyering. And what you're doing is not only providing a different perspective and a shift to that segment, but also the actual clients that those lawyers serve, is like, this is an alternative if you don't want to go down the full legal route, or within the legal route to have an alternative to get to where you need to go. So that's kind of my understanding of it. So I'd like
Yeah.
you to fill in any gaps
Yeah.
that there exist.
That was a really good, thank you for sharing your understanding. And I'll say that that is like the standard understanding. I think the standard understanding too is that mediation is part of law and legal. And, I started my journey thinking I was going to be an attorney. I was a hardcore mock trial kid in high school. I went to the school on the East Coast. I'm in Colorado. I'm from Colorado. And I wanted to be, where the founding fathers made our laws. And I got to school thinking I'm going to be pre-law track, took my first mediation training, and all of those dreams crumbled pretty immediately. And I was a little resentful. And then I thought, this is the future. I would rather be on the track of where a future meets everyone's needs than continue to perpetuate a system that has proven time and time again that it cannot achieve what it is designed to achieve. So, one huge misconception that I'm pushing against is that mediation is considered part of alternative dispute resolution, ADR. Alternative to what? To the status quo, to the thing that is not the alternative. It gives power to the other system to define yourself in the terms of the dominant system. I do not define mediation in terms of its relationship to the law. Every culture and every human civilization has had a way to manage conflict and to manage their relationships with each other. Not every system in the history of humanity has had a legal system with judges and lawyers that is state sanctioned and whose power is sanctioned by state violence, right? Why do we pay our taxes? We can be put in jail. Why do you follow the law? You could be put in jail. Um, there's all these other layers to make it seem less violent, but ultimately, you're doing it. You have to do it because without doing it, the state can justify violence against you. And as a society, we have said we're all okay with that. Um, I will correct that. I don't think as a society we've said we're okay with that. We were never asked. We did not consent to that system. We inherited it. And it is not the only system to manage disputes. It is not the only system to collaborate in. It is not the only system to build and strengthen our relationships. So I'm really pushing on the field to say, instead of saying we're alternative dispute resolution, we're just dispute resolution. And I want to take it even a step further and say, yes, mediation is great for disputes. And what if you mediated before there was a dispute? What if you used it proactively? What if you used mediation with your coworkers, your business partners, your creative partners, your life partner, your co-parent, when you love each other, when you're about to make a collaborative decision together? Why not use mediation then? Because when you use it then, you don't have to use it to get divorced later down the road. If you used it when you were dating, when you started dating, to say, hey, what are our plans for date night? What are our plans for communication? What is important to me around this engagement? Let's actually have a conversation and communicate collaboratively about what my needs are and how we're going to make those, how we're going to meet those, and what are your needs, how we're going to meet yours. And I want to see us go from the alternative to, hey, we are just as valid of dispute resolution as the courts, if not more, because we do not need the threat of state violence to have our outcomes follow through on. And also, why do we only come in when things are broken? It's much like the American medical system. Unless you're dying and you're in the ER and your arm is cut off, they're not interested. But what about proactive medicine? What about saying, hey, why don't we take a model from the countries in Asia around the world that have better health outcomes, because not only is their healthcare universal and free to their citizens, but they're trying to catch diseases early. They're screening for things. They're looking for proactive solutions. They're trying to have a lifestyle of health and wellness instead of just a lifestyle of sickness that only ends when you're threatened by life ending. So why are we framing it this way? Well, it's cultural. It's colonization. It's this idea that we just do things the way we've always done them. And for me, mediation is an act of saying, we are humans, we have our consent to give, and we should have choices. The court is good at certain things. There are certain things. I don't want to mediate a murder. I think the judge and the attorneys and the police can handle that just fine. But if I have an issue with my neighbor because they're being too loud, or I'm co-parenting someone and our kids are going to see us fighting for the rest of their lives, I have a different need that the court can't meet, and mediation can meet that. And when we call it alternative dispute resolution, not only are we devaluing our field, but we're telling those people, your needs aren't as valid as the needs of people whose rights are protected by the law. And what I want to tell those people is, your need to talk about the socks, your need to put boundaries around when your ex can text you or not, those are just as valid as your need to have a custody agreement. That is a just as valid need, and mediation can meet all of those needs. And with custody and visitation, we may need to partner with the courts and collaborate with them. And I'm not above that. I would love to collaborate with the courts. But when the courts don't want to hear about who Susie's socks are, like, how are we going to get Susie's socks to match when she has two sock throwers and she's going between two parents, I will have that conversation with you, because that impacts your life just as much as the custody can. And there's a judgment that the courts make. This is important, and the state will justify using its violence to enforce, and this is unimportant, and we are not going to include it in our system. And mediation is saying all of those things are valid. We can have conversations about all those things. We can make plans about all those things, and we can get all your needs met in collaboration with the courts, in collaboration with other systems, instead of saying yes or no the way so many of our systems are designed. So that was my big soapbox. I'll stop there. I'm curious if you have questions about that or where you'd like to go from there.
I think we could just have a separate episode on just diving into everything that you just talked about, because I see so many parallels between what you're talking about and like the work that I do and like what I've been trained in, from, you know, simple things like the communication. It just sounded to me like this is like humanizing the 90% of the experience that cannot fit into a courtroom. Like with, I think the socks kind of summed it up for me. It's like, yeah, that is the quality of life aspect that I agree. You can't really write into a law.
No.
Like, it's not going to be a bylaw of like my quality of life. So like, I understand that, but
Yeah.
like it is what encompasses the human experience of this particular thing, and the container is just not made for it. And
Exactly.
yeah, so I mean, I literally, like, we could spend a whole episode just doing that and diving into that and look at the parallels and me asking you other questions or whatever. So I'm just gonna kind of not go there so we can keep it to the
Yeah.
point of what we're doing here. But I just wanted to kind of make that clear because
Hmm.
I really realized like I've never kind of gone down this road, but it's really cool to actually
Yeah.
hear all of this. So number one, appreciate you for that. And then number two, to just kind of keep this on point. So obviously, like you have this vast experience. You're carving your own way. You're getting like it almost sounds like there's like a tribe of people that want to do the same thing with you, like they want to be part of like this movement that you're making. So what are like the business challenges that you're experiencing right now that kind of bring you here today?
That's a good question. So first, I will say I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur when I was in third grade, when junior achievement came, and I remember them explaining entrepreneurship, and I thought, well, that's obviously the best option. Why would anyone want anything else? And then my classmates were like, "What? That's not the best option." I'm like, for me, it is. Geez, okay. I thought this was obvious. So I knew for a long time. My mom is a small business owner. I watched her go through that experience, and I always knew that's where I was going to end up. And then when I found mediation, I knew that it was going to be something to do with mediation. The business challenges is a little bit what I went into now. One is people don't understand what mediation is. And even when they do and they speak to it, I don't necessarily agree with them. I see a different future. Sometimes I do agree with them. And then we are in the uphill battle together. I would say that the other business challenge, I'm not trained as an entrepreneur. I get a lot of help and I look for a lot of advice. I've done all the courses, I've done all the things that you talk about in your training. And what I have found to be a challenge is a lot of the models don't fit. Even the movement building, impact driven businesses, I've looked around. And what I find very frustrating currently is pace, one, and two, this sort of unwillingness to acknowledge that the legal financial systems are incredibly complex in 2022 and they're very difficult to navigate. So telling someone, just take this, I'll take all the finance classes and we talk about the same thing: profit loss statements. We talk about how to do your pitch deck, all these things. But there isn't this acknowledgement of it is a very complex system. And the biggest challenge I have is figure out where I fit in that. So I've narrowed it down to I want non-diluted funding. I know I need to get funding. I've been bootstrapping, and that only goes so far. So I've accepted that bootstrapping is not feasible as I continue to scale. I'm already at 3 people on the team, and bootstrapping doesn't cut it for 3. And I need more than 3 people to do this work. So that's the first thing is, okay, I need funding. 2 is, what does that even mean? So I had to do all this research. There's all this venture capital out there. There's all these bank loans. There's all these grants. There's so many opportunities. So trying to figure out where do I fit and say, okay, well, venture doesn't work for me. Loans, my venture is diluted, right? They might want equity in the business. I don't want to give that up. For very good reason. I'm eligible for more grants when it's a woman of color owned business. And also, I don't want to give up control of the business or follow sort of conventional business wisdom and knowledge. And then it's finding the time and resources to do it and the knowledge, right? Like, I'm not a finance person. I'm a mediator. I'm great at being a mediator, and I'm great at learning how to run my business and bootstrapping it and getting through it. And I'm making really good gains. My business has doubled every year. I've done it. Even though I started from very little, every year it's growing exponentially. But all the advice and all the places that I find, it's very hard to find the right fit that aligns with my values. And it's also hard to understand the full complexity of it. So even though I've gotten one word, like, okay, I want non-diluted funding. Cool. There's a word for that. I didn't know that. Is that the only word for it? Would people know what I mean when I say that? How do I search for that specifically? And what does it take to do fundraising in that way? And so I have to learn how to build the path myself. And then sometimes the path already exists, but then it's not totally a fit. Sometimes it doesn't. And I think, great, here we go again. I've got to like clear the forest and lay down my path again. And then just knowing very humbly that I don't know what I don't know. So in mediation, I think, we've heard about the Dunning-Kruger effect. I consider myself an expert. I am an expert enough to know that I don't know everything. And I know vaguely what I don't know. And it took a long time to get to that expertise. It took a degree in peace studies and 10 years of practice and plenty of trainings and a ton of mediation sessions. I haven't done any of that for financing a business. I've looked at a ton of courses. I think I've done my research great, but I have not put 10 years in. I am not an expert, and I don't want to be an arrogant newbie and say I know everything, but I also really need to know that I know what I'm doing when the stakes are as high as I need to protect my IP, I need to be protected from, being sued, and I need money for my business. So that's sort of where I'm stuck, and I think the stuckness is around very humbly and very really knowing I don't know everything there is to know in those fields. I need help, but when I go to find it, it's difficult to determine if we're a fit or not.
Okay, got it. So that's a lot. So I'm just going to ask some clarifying questions. 1 second. Okay. So there's a lot of like the self aspects of like, I don't know, right? Like, I don't know this, I don't know that, I don't know, etc. And then there is the actual business aspect of like, well, I need funding, bootstrapping's not feasible, etc. So would that be like, if we're just looking at the business side of things, would like I need funding be the
Yeah.
biggest
Let's talk
aspect?
about I need funding because I also know when you asked, is this a you problem? I'm like, it is also a me problem. I'm uncomfortable, and we're all uncomfortable with the unfamiliar, right? It is unfamiliar to me to raise large sums of money for my business. I've done fundraising for other people, written grants. I was in sales for 10 years as well. I always had to have multiple jobs to support my mediation fixation. And I'm still doing that, right? I'm used to piecing together small amounts of money to get myself kind of moving forward with my lifestyle. What I'm not used to is this new mindset of I'm responsible for other people's income. Whoa. And I'm also responsible for raising the funds it takes to get all the legal, financial, branding services, a business, all of the foundational structure a business needs. I can do some of it, but I do need experts and they cost money. And maintaining a payroll and taxes and all of these things, I'm not used to that. So I'm open to it. I'm ready for it. I think that there maybe be some emotional blocks, but there's also just the fundamental that's a shift. It's new. And it's a big shift. It's a big shift to go from I only do my personal finances to okay, now I'm doing my personal finances in my teeny little LLC to it's still teeny, but we're moving to like multiple people and we're looking to scale way out there from where we are. And I'm ready, I'm willing, but I am trying to be gentle with myself and saying like, yeah, I get to be a little like for a second because it's huge. It's a big shift. And it's not my expertise, right? I'm very confident in my expertise, but I don't want to walk up to a banker with no research, no experience, no idea what I'm saying. And the preparation I've done has been somewhat helpful to get the landscape of like, oh, here are some options, but I still don't feel as confident as I'd like to in it.
Got it. Okay, so what is your source of security?
This is going to sound a little like doom and gloom, but my sense of security is the worst that can happen is I die. And if I die, I won't care anymore because I'll be dead. So that means nothing is that scary. The worst that could happen is I die. And even that is like, I won't, I'll be dead. So what are we going to, who cares at that point? I'll become compost and I'll be free as a bird. I'll have no concerns anymore, or there'll be some interesting afterlife. I don't know. But that's it. I'm secure because I'm like, bring it. The worst that could happen is I die. I don't actually think it's that bad.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about that. Because okay, so I guess okay, let me contextualize it before we dive into it. So I asked you, what is your source of security? You basically said, well, if I die, it doesn't matter. So is that really a source of security, or is that really, well, I don't even need security because if
Yeah.
the ultimate thing happens, like who cares? So,
Yeah. It's
right. So what
security
comes up
in
for you
that
when I share that?
there's a security in, I think insecurity comes from fear, and there's always going to be some fear. But when I ask myself, what is the biggest fear I could have? What's the worst that could happen? It's death. And if that happens, I'm secure in that that will definitely happen at some point, and I'm okay with it. So it would matter. I mean, there would be consequences, right? Like obviously, but that is security in that I'm anchored in reality, and I'm anchored in there's nothing that's going to happen while I'm alive that I'm going to be like, this is worse than what I could possibly imagine. Because the worst I can imagine is death. So anything that gets thrown at me, I might have that amygdala hijack, but then I tell myself, like, this isn't going to kill us. We're okay. Right.
Mhm.
And I can very easily calm that and say, even if this is death, I've been ready for this for a while. I'm okay. I knew it was going to come. I've dealt with my mortality. It's not a big deal. And so I can very easily get back to the moment and say, this is challenging and scary, but let's do it. So it's challenging and scary to say I'm walking into this field of funding for a business that is scary to me. I don't know finance, never had to do this before. Stakes feel very high, and they'll never be as high as death. So I'm secure in I can move forward.
Okay. So which would be worse, not paying payroll or dying?
Dying.
Okay. So if dying would be worse and ultimately I'm not afraid of death, then why are you so afraid of not making payroll?
Because I value the relationship I have with my team. And if I've made a commitment to say, hey, I'm ready and willing to pay you for the work you do, and I'm unable to do that, it would be really disappointing. It's scary in that I could maybe mess it up in ways I don't know. Like I know there's paying it and there's not paying it. I know there's taxes that I have to be aware of. I know there are payroll laws in different states, and Colorado has its own. I know that there's like a system for that I have to follow. I have to learn that. But what if there's something I didn't know about because I'm not a payroll expert, because payroll and these things are complicated. So
Okay.
what if I
And what
miss
if there
something?
was something you didn't know and it got through the crack?
It would let me know by I would get in trouble, and then I would have to find a way to get out of that trouble.
Fair.
So
But what does that mean about you?
what that means about me is I accept I don't know everything, and that
Okay.
nothing's me
And when you
perfect.
don't know everything and there are consequences to not knowing everything,
Yeah.
how do you feel inside?
I feel like the system needs to be overhauled because that doesn't really seem fair to put humans in that situation,
Okay.
and
So
I accept that
quads,
I'm in it.
right? I agree with you that there's fundamental systemic things that need changing,
Yeah.
100%. However, the question and the context around the question was you don't know something. There are consequences for that. And then I asked you, well, how would that make you feel? And your brain went into, well, the system is such, and like it just went into something like external.
Yeah.
So why do you think it deflected that question?
So I think and this is philosophy. I think that that's liberal philosophy. So not like Democrat, Republican. This idea of free will would say you deflected the question. If you're in the deterministic mindset, which I'm in, and saying everything is causal, I would say, well, of course I would be afraid of something that is a system that says if you don't know the rules, you get in trouble anyway. That is inherently going to cause some level of fear. And that's not a flaw I have. It's a reasonable reaction for any animal that's like, oh, I'm in a system. I didn't choose it. And if I mess up because I didn't know that that was a mistake, I would pay consequences for it. I get to have some fear.
Okay. So that's a great intellectual answer about a very simple question, which is how would you feel?
Yeah. And I would say I would feel scared. I am scared of messing it up and being caught up in a system that I don't understand.
Okay. And when you're scared of getting caught up in a system you don't understand, then what does that mean about you?
That means that I probably need to learn more about that system.
And what if you can't? Let's just say in terms of
Yeah.
capacity, that you can only be an expert in so many things
Yeah.
in the next short amount of time.
Yeah. So then I have to weigh the risk. How much trouble could I get in? Am I willing to risk getting in that trouble? How much is there to gain? Am I willing to go get that, even if it means something bad could happen?
Okay. Which would be your options on how to deal with the consequences. But
Hmm.
what does it actually say about you?
What does what say about me? Can you rephrase the
If you
question?
can't learn everything and be an expert in everything and cover all of the bases, what does that say about you?
I'm human.
Okay. Can you accept that?
Yeah.
Okay. If you rewound this conversation and looked at the amount of times you highlighted, I don't know this, I don't know that, I can't be an expert in this about they like, is it really okay? Or is it your brain being hyper vigilant about all of the things you cannot be an expert in?
I think it's really okay to be human. What is not okay is what I said originally, that there is a system that is rigged in this way. That's not okay. I can't change it in my lifetime, so I have to accept it. And how to work with that when I'm like, yeah, I'm reasonably afraid. Like it's scary, right? Like if you don't pay payroll, you can go to jail. You're like, I don't want to end up in jail. I don't want to end up, with my business losing its entire credibility because we don't pay our employees. That's terrible. That's a risk that I took when I started a business. Um, it's not okay that that's our system. That is a system we're in. And so what I know I have to do is learn more about it. And I'm slowly putting the pieces together. And then also accept that there's risk and accept that it's a scary risk. And that's worth the gain of being able to do this collaboratively and paying my mediators what they deserve for the work we do.
100%. I agree with you on all those fronts. And I think what I'm getting at with a lot of these is there's a lot, and this is very common with people that are very intellectual and they're
Hmm.
very good at what they do. But there's a lot of mental real estate being put in the externals and in the I don't knows,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
it's like, hypothetically, if like you had 100 units of your mental capacity, it's like if you can just look at this conversation, it's like at least half is being put towards the system and like the system is this and it needs to be different, etc. Which,
Mhm.
as you stated, like you can't actually control any of that. So your only job is how do I really build a better system,
Yeah.
right? And then a lot of these I don't knows, right? So it's like, okay, if 50% of your capacity is hyper focused on that, what would happen if you let that go?
Yeah. Um, well, I guess I want to know more where you want to go with that conversation. Because what happens when I let it go is I start learning more about payroll and what are the rules. And then I start getting creative about how can I not have to deal with this? Is it possible? Is this really the only option? It's the only option presented to me, but is it really the only one? And
Okay.
then I can start getting creative. I can start seeing possibilities, or I can just very quickly accept, I guess I can't. And so I have to do it this way. Please tell me authorities that will put me in prison if I do it wrong, how to do it so that I don't end up in prison.
Okay. And there's a lot of focus on like, I'm going to go to jail, right? Like, no matter what I do, it's like, I got to make sure I don't go to jail. So there's this like very big focus on, right? Like the system is this way. I don't know a lot of
Yeah.
things, but it's like the consequences are dire. Like, even when I ask you, where's your sense of security? Like you went straight to death, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know what's behind that. I'm merely just
Yeah.
being a
I
mirror
mean,
to reflect back to you what it is
yeah.
that I see. And for somebody as brilliant and as ambitious and as vision oriented, right? To me, it's very interesting that so much of your mental capacity is being rooted in like things that really I don't think serve your mission.
Yeah.
Right? Like you need to be prudent, all of that.
Yeah.
I'm all for that. So what's coming up for you?
I think that's helpful to hear reflected back because I can see how I've used it as an example in this conversation and how it could seem like that takes up more mental real estate. But actually, it's the opposite for me. Like when you ask, what does this say about you? I would say there's this huge realm of possibilities, right? And I've narrowed down all of the like worst possibilities, the things that I wouldn't want, down to two things: death and prison. So they actually take up less real estate, right? Because otherwise, there's all these other anxieties. What if my employees don't like me? What if I fail? All these like typical fears, all these other anxieties. I'm trying to like name them, but they're just not like as vivid to me because I'm saying all of those things don't really matter because the worst would be those two things, and it's very unlikely those are going to happen. So if the decision I'm making now doesn't land me in those two places, probably going to be okay. I can live with the consequences. So then there's this whole other realm of possibilities of all the things that could happen, and that actually takes up more real estate because I've sort of shifted all of those things to narrow it down to two: prison and death. And the rest of it is, wow, we have all these places to grow. And I can see a couple different paths. I can try to prioritize them, but that actually takes up more. So I think in conversation, when I'm trying to be like brief and kind of just make a quick point, I go to like boom, boom, versus trying to explain this whole breadth of possibilities I see that are taking up more mental real estate.
And that's fair. I mean, obviously, this is the one conversation, that we did have. So obviously, I can't know all of that. So fair. I'm more than happy to accept that. Um, so I guess my question to you now is like, what's present for you right now? Like, is there something that you feel like stands out from this conversation? You're like, okay, this is kind of going around in circles.
No,
I'm just curious about that.
no, I think I'm really present that we just met. So there was a lot of like context to create. There's a lot of getting to know each other. Like, I understand now that for you, the more things I talk about, you're sort of seeing like, okay, that's what's taking up more mental space. And then we've just made a really good communication move, which is a nerdy mediator, where like you pointed that out and I was like, I can see that. And because it's my brain and my brain real estate, I can tell you actually those 2 points take up way less space than like the web of possibilities of positive things that could happen or goals that I have. So now we understand each other better. And now that would be something in communication, we wouldn't make that mistake again. I think what's present for me is when I say, I want to get coached, like raise money, let's do it. I'm wondering like, yeah, where are you mapping me? What can I be more aware of? Because I do want to. And I do know I'm missing a lot of things. And I kind of say those I don't knows to stay humble and to also say like, yeah, what do I not know? Like I'd rather have somebody outside of me point out the blind spots than me just say, hey, Drasco, here's all the things I already know. And you're like, great. Like, cool. That, like, why did you tell me that?
Got it. Okay. So what value do you think I gain from knowing what you don't know?
I think that as a coach, I would hope the value is practicing your skills and learning, like, about mediation. And then I think pointing out blind spots would be, I don't know, hopefully satisfying in itself. I was hoping to gain more of that. But I mean, if you want me to tell you everything I've learned about fundraising and that'd be helpful for you, then I'm happy to share that. But I didn't think that was the conversation we were having.
No, 100%. I have no interest in knowing anything and everything about fundraising. Okay. So in that case, you're like, okay, well, I want to go down the fundraising route and I want to know more about that. So when it comes to fundraising, and at the same time, you're like, okay, well, I've doubled my business in the last X amount, or it's consistently been growing. So my first question, just for clarity, is like, well, why go down the fundraising route if you've already had this success?
Yeah. Um, because that success won't scale for three people. It will scale for me, and I would be fine if this was a lifestyle business, but I want to see I have a larger vision that I cannot achieve by myself or with just three people. And fundraising will kind of allow us to get to that next step of scaling where all three of us have consistent, predictable salaries instead of what we're doing now, which is like, the client windfall and the windfall and then the droughts. That's okay at the end of the year when everything comes together, but that's not optimal conditions for us to grow as a team, to build the business, to achieve the mission we're going for. So it's time to grow and we need capital and I need to get it
Got it. And that's to grow quickly.
to grow faster than how we've been growing, but not as fast as a venture capitalist would want. So then there's a scale of pace. And I think even as a one person who likes slower pace, it's moved very quickly in 5 years. And I'm like, oh, okay, I can handle that pace. Cool. Don't want to go faster than that. I don't want a venture capitalist in here going, let's like go, 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 go and break our backs and destroy our wellness and grow until we greet all this profit. I want to be like, well, I want to grow collaboratively. And as a professional collaboration, I know that's slower and I'm willing to take that. But I cannot scale at the pace I want to with bootstrapping anymore because I want to bring more people in and I want to pay them a respectable professional wage for the work we're doing. And I can't do that bootstrapping.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I mean, listen, I think for you, like just kind of listening to everything that you're saying, I think a lot of this is really just a skill gap, right? I think you've kind
Yeah.
of identified that as well. I mean, by no means is that my area of expertise.
Yeah.
In terms of like who you are being doing this, I think it would be a deeper conversation and just taking a look at more like the mental real estate bit, definitely. And I think
Yeah.
exploring that bit, you talked about a lot of positive possibilities. Yes, I haven't heard about those as much in the tactical as I have in the visionary, which I think they both have their place.
Mm-hmm.
And the part that I would highlight for you, in addition to the skill gap, which like I said, I can't help you with, but the part that did stand out for me, like you're very much one of those individuals that I don't know if you've ever gone down this road, but that could potentially fall into like the rigid pattern with regards to extremely smart, very well articulated. You like the process, you like to know things.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the process gives you, like I asked you about like the security, like, okay, well, if I know the things that I know how to do, and that tells me how I need to perform, what's valuable, what's not valuable, etc. That's all good and great. And people move quite a lot through that space, which you yourself have shown you can do. Where it starts to be like that strength could potentially be, and I don't know this for sure, but I'm just kind of highlighting it for
Yeah.
your own awareness if you choose to like look down this path. It's where that can become like that strength can become a distortion
Yeah.
is where it separates you from self, specifically emotions, like what feels most resonant, what feels most authentic,
Yeah.
without the external, and subsequently to trust that over an external. And the reason that I bring this up, and I bring it up as just you can take what fits, what doesn't, is oftentimes when people get into that pattern, they are looking for the external to give them the structure of what is appropriate. And for you, because you're trying to build your own path and really build your own thing,
Mhm.
it's kind of like consensus in some ways going to work against you because consensus in many ways comes from the systems that you are trying to
Yeah.
work against. And this conflict of like, I don't know, but I need to know, but I don't know, to me just kind of plays in potentially you could go down this road and spend a lot of time trying to go for the external answer. Where if you spent some of that time really like tuning in, what is the best
Yeah.
next step for me and the vision that I have? And if I can clear that authentic self trust without the fear or the narratives around it, I think the path forward may be a bit
Mhm.
clear, right? And that's not discounting the skills you also need to do to get there, but that's just kind of what's coming up for me. So what lands for you from that?
Yeah. It's very validating, because I think that, well, one, you said conflict, and I was like, ah, that's my jam. And I do see that what I'm doing in my business and how I'm running it, how I run my team is very much in conflict with the external. It's very much in conflict with the culture I was raised in Colorado and America. It's very much in conflict with the way the systems are built. And I think there's just, I think of like teenagers, right, who are like the pros at like pushing the boundaries and starting conflict, right? And I was one, and I remember being that, and I was like, man, I'm so good at this. And then my brain developed, and now I'm like, God, where'd it go? I missed that. And I think I'm just kind of looking at the system and the skills gap and saying, okay, like, where are the boundaries, right? Like, how far can I push this until like, oops, I'm in prison or dead. So like I have a lot of room, but like how far does that go? And then carving my own path and saying, you know what, like that's cool. Thank you for that nice external structure that have to accept I'm trapped in. And where's the back door, or where can I shrink down so you can't feel me on your edges and I can kind of operate externally, internally. So like looking at payroll, I was like, oh, I can have contractors. I can W-9, I can 1099 this. These are the boundaries around that, right? Like I can't tell them when to show up and what to wear because like there are labor laws about that. I'll follow those. Cool. I have to make sure that what I pay them is beneath this before they need to sign a W-9 or whatever. So I'm figuring those things out and saying, I see where the payroll thing is, and if I go just over here, I can still be compliant and get a little bit of wiggle room where I'm not trapped in a payroll system that I find not super helpful to my ultimate goals here. So I think it's that intuition that's saying, I need to know the boundaries. And I get to them and I'm like, not right. Like I could do, a PhD in payroll and then determine like what is the best decision, but then I wouldn't have time to mediate, right? Because I'm a human with a limited amount of time and life on this earth and energy. And so I'm saying, I like that you're kind of pointing out that there's know-how and there's intellectual approach to things, and you do have to understand these complex systems. And there is place and room for that intuition. And the intuition has guided me to say, there's got to be something other than this. Let me just look a little bit harder. And then also with my team, any HR professional, because I used to work in HR as well, would look at me and say, did you seriously just hire someone the way you just did? Like you had a feeling that they were good. And I was like, yeah, I did. You didn't vet them. You didn't do a background check. You didn't have them sign a contract. Where's your NDA? And I'm like, look, I'm building trust with a person. I'm getting to know a human. And I'm letting that human know, yes, I'm vulnerable to you. You could totally screw me over. You could publish my IP. You could do all sorts of things. And I trust you to not do that. And I think that the legal model that says, screw relationship, let's just quickly sign a piece of paper, has proven that that piece of paper is only as valuable as the person caring to follow the laws and you being able to enforce them. So sure, you signed an NDA, sure, you did a background check, sure, you checked all the boxes and you did it correctly. The person still screwed you over. And you also started that relationship as a transaction, whereas with my team, it was a longer trek. Took me a longer time to find them. Took me a longer time to build that trust. I got a lot of flack from my, HR colleagues. Like, seriously, are you doing this? No. Did you do this? No. Are you going to do it? No. And my intuition was saying, I don't need to do that. And I don't want to start a relationship with a partner as a contractual, transactional, culturally business minded oriented. I don't owe you anything. You don't owe me anything. I'd rather build out relationship with a person saying, we both love mediation. We both want to bring it into the 21st century, and we can do it. And we need to stick together. We need to collaborate. I need to understand your needs. You need to understand mine. And we're going to meet them together. And I don't need an NDA or I don't need a contract when I do it that way. Maybe I should. Maybe I will later. Maybe I'll tell her, let's just do it just in case. But I didn't start that way. And I followed the intuition, even though I knew intellectually these are all the contracts I have to put together. So what you said was very
Absolutely.
validating.
Good. I'm glad that it is, because I mean, the way you summarized it and reflected it back, I mean, beautifully done, right? As I said
Thank you.
before. And there's just a few things I just want to reflect back, again, as confirmations of that. It's like what I kept hearing when you were speaking is, it's like, if you're gonna have this passion to build something unconventional, like you
Mhm.
you cannot go the conventional route of it,
Yeah.
right? And I think when you said about, like, I got to follow my intuition to do all these, I'm like, that's exactly it, right? It's almost like the conversations for you internally as you do your own work, or whatever, or hire somebody to have these blind spots. It's like, how can I stay unconventional so as to serve my mission instead of spending time looking at how the system is broken. So like kind of like, that's what I mean,
Yeah.
like reallocating that
Yeah.
mental real estate. And then as far as like I got to know the rules before I can like break them or like work within them or like whatever analogy you want to use for that. Right. The thing that came up for me is like, okay, you tend to move towards I gotta know the things, but I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, so how could you accelerate that without
Yeah.
actually having to have a PhD in it? Like, could
Yeah.
you just get consultants to ask these very specific
Yeah.
questions, they answer them, and then you move on with your life? Or do you really need to spend X amount of time learning it to the degree that you've learned mediation? Right. So I think kind of like
Yeah.
reorienting and shifting your perspective and focus on that piece is like very important. And really to me it's kind of like, you know, you more embody the energy of like a Zappos or like an Elon Musk in the sense that like these are the problems I want to solve, I'm going to go solve them, and then I'm going to ask for, you know, forgiveness rather than permission. I'm not saying break any
I'm
laws, which I know you
I
do,
bought
but
that T-shirt. Just
yeah,
kidding. I need to make it that I ask forgiveness, not permission, and I think I want to just balance that with some basic rules, right? Like,
of
I
course.
don't want to illegally be contracting my contractors and then I'm violating their labor rights, right? Like, I do value labor. I, support unions. I like care about that. So I'm like, I will follow your rules because they're theoretically there for a reason. That said, the federal government doesn't even follow its own rules. I was an illegal intern with the Department of Commerce in DC. They fingerprint me and everything. And I was like, so the labor laws say that I should be having these things if I'm an unpaid intern and I don't have them. And they were like, oh yeah, no one checks. I was like, cool, 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 cool.
And
So
that's kind of where I'm getting at with like, you know, you got to find your balance and I think your self trust on let me just build the thing that I want to build.
yeah,
Right. And I don't even see you intentionally. Like I don't get the feeling of you like, oh, I'm gonna like, you know, push these laws to their absolute brink so I could like maximize my return. Like I don't see you being that kind of
yeah,
person, right? Who especially one that puts relationships first. It's almost like I guess what I'm inviting you to consider, like when we
yeah,
wrap this up, is like, how can I relax
yeah,
the rigidity of my need to like know the system so that I don't have this big backlash or get into trouble, right? Like
yeah,
there's like narratives from childhood of like getting into trouble,
yeah,
and just really nurture this space that like my vision is mine. It's a beautiful vision,
yeah,
and I can go forward and really create the next different thing, right? Like if Netflix needed like Blockbuster to like operate the way they did, they never would have made their thing, right? But
yeah,
Blockbuster, like you don't change the system, you build a new one, and that's the energy that I get from you. So it's kind of like, I guess my invitation to you is just if you're building a new system, why you're relying so much on the old one when probably you're not going to be breaking any major
yeah,
laws. And for the things you do need to know of, how can you accelerate just knowing what you need to know as opposed to having to be an expert in all of it so you can facilitate faster
yeah.
implementation of everything?
I think the two things when you say that, because I know we're at time, is what I tell my mentees all the time, which is, and I'll say it to myself. So, Elizabeth, if you're the type of person who cares about following labor laws and making sure that you don't get into the type of legal trouble that will land you in prison, you're probably the kind of person that will never accidentally do that. And so I
Exactly.
can just release myself of that concern and say, the fact that I am aware that those logs exist and I have the intention to not break them, I'm probably okay. And I can rely on the experts to help me for the rest of it. And then the other thing that resonates with what you're saying about, Netflix kind of needed Blockbuster, right? Like, and I'm nostalgic for Blockbuster. I remember being there every Friday. It was great, right? I miss it so much. And I also love that I get Netflix, and I'm very also much disliking how there are too many streaming systems. So there's a sweet spot right in there. And Netflix got it, and now that sweet spot's gone and it's tanking. And where I'm at is saying I don't want to do the throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't want it to be Netflix versus Blockbuster because what people don't realize is that Netflix actually gave Blockbuster the opportunity to buy it, and Blockbuster chose not to. And so I think what's interesting about that history is there was an opportunity to collaborate. There was an opportunity to collaborate and actually have a future where I can still go to Blockbuster and walk through the store and have my nostalgia and have streaming services. But because the business paradigm and the culture is fighting, it's you or me, there's a winner and a loser. There was a winner and loser, and Blockbuster sadly is now, there's only like one store somewhere on like the West Coast, and it's like very kooky and funny, and like everyone's like, well, whatever, this is stupid. For only people who are nostalgic like me. And I'm looking at the courts and saying, I disagree with so much of how you are. I don't like that you throw people in prison. There are things that I dislike, and I will not and cannot build a future without you. And so if you gave me the opportunity to buy you, or you wanted to buy me, let's do it, because the future is not competitive. It's not do or die. It's not you or me. It's win-win. And if Blockbuster and Netflix had been in a culture that was more about win-win solutions and less about dog eat dog, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to beat you, and then I get everything, they might have made a different decision. And we might have a different landscape in how we get to enjoy our movies and media. But capitalism competition turned it into this hellscape of, oh crap, I have to get this subscription to watch this movie. I've got to Google where I can even see the movie. How much does HBO cost? What's Paramount Plus? I'm tired of it. I don't actually like it. It doesn't actually improve my life that happened. And so I want to learn from that lesson and say, okay, I will not fight you. This is not a fight. This is a gain. We can get win-win solutions. What does that look like? And that means I do have to understand at least a little bit about your language, right? I can't say delete competition. I have to understand competition in order to appreciate collaboration. I have to be able to understand a competitive person to be able to collaborate with them. And so I think what I can do though is dial down my curiosity and say, okay, you got the basics. Stop, have a professional do the rest, and move on, because I'll continue down the rabbit hole. Let me learn more about it. What happened with Blockbuster and Netflix? And I get all of this side information, and it's anecdotally okay, like it worked out in this conversation. But it's eating up, like you said, more of that mental real estate, and more of that real estate should go towards, okay, how do I make sure that I'm paid well? How do I make sure my team is paid well? How do I make sure that our business foundation is solid? Because we're in a competitive environment. Business is competitive. So how can I go into that environment defended and protected so that my thing doesn't get torn to shreds? And then I go in, how can I say, I'm here and I'm minimally defended, and go ahead, throw a punch if you want to. It won't kill me. I'm sturdy enough, but I won't throw a punch back. And I might just ask you what made you feel you should throw a punch. So like, you say you talk to another mediator, and I'm like, cool. I want to actually collaborate with her instead of having her private practice and my private practice fight for conflict when there will be plenty of conflict. It's not running out. Like humans aren't going to suddenly start getting along tomorrow. We're not in a scarcity mindset. There is an abundance of conflict. There is an abundance of relationships that could benefit from mediation. So how do we shift that mindset? And I can direct more real estate to that if I'm less nitpicky about, wait a second, what's payroll? What are all these laws? How do I get a PhD in this? I can just ask someone who has it.
Correct. Yeah. Beautifully said. And yeah, I agree with all of that. It's like,
Cool.
keep the goal, know just enough to move towards the goal, and honor the fact that you're building something unique. So keep building something unique.
Yeah.
Like if I could just reflect back, I think that would be it. So yeah, I think this was a super cool conversation, bit different than the ones I normally have, but that's a beautiful thing as well. So then just to close this off, if you can summarize in your own words, kind of what is it that you came into this conversation thinking was the issue or whatever, and then any like aha moments or realization as a result of it?
That's a great question. I think I walked in being very confident in knowing that I don't know everything I need to know about raising money for my business. And that includes payroll and, where that money would get spent on my employees and my team. And I'm still confident that I don't know everything I need to know. What I am one step closer towards is taking action towards earning that money, towards getting that funding, towards paying my team, instead of taking action towards just continuing to learn and continuing to try to understand something that there are professionals whose job it is to understand. That's not my job. My job is to continue my mission and to continue mediating and doing that well. and all of the other business work and help I can outsource and delegate and get help and not lose all my mental real estate to trying to fill in all the gaps of the I don't knows.
Beautiful. Awesome. Love that. And yeah, then you can just close this off, let everybody know where to find you, who are the best people to find you. Floor is yours for that.
Great. It's really easy. We have the URL humanzmediate.com, and that's humans spelled with a Z instead of an S. So humans plural, but with a Z, humanzmediate.com. And you can schedule a 15-minute call with me and we can see if we're a good fit to provide services to you.
Love it. As always, we'll include that in the show notes. Elizabeth, thank you very much for coming here today and diving down this rabbit hole with me.
Thanks, Roscoe. And I do want a copy of this. I want the recording of this because I want to just play back to myself that last part when I start going down the rabbit hole to research. I can just be like, you said this. Listen to yourself. Come on, lady. Stop Googling.
Absolutely. I will make sure to send you that. So no worries. But yes, thank you very much. And yeah, for everybody else listening, we'll see you on the next one.